It is our honor to have Ms. Mathilde Mesnard, Deputy Director of OECD EnviroSeries, to give us a keynote speech today. Although Ms. Mesnard cannot join us in person today, she has recorded a video to set the scene for today's discussion. Let's watch the video now.
Colleagues, I'm delighted to participate virtually in this important conference, discussing a key issue for Hong Kong and globally, how to finance and deliver net zero innovations for the climate transition. The question of how to finance the net zero transition is one of the crucial challenges of our time. Reaching the 1.5-degree temperature goal of the Paris Agreement calls for huge amounts of additional funding. The energy sector alone will require $4 trillion in annual investment by 2030, as estimated by the International Energy Agency. This calls for aligning finance flows from all sources, spanning public, private, domestic, and international, with climate objectives. This is the context for the rapid growth of transition finance over recent years. Transition finance is particularly high on the agenda in Asia, given the speed and scale at which emissions are growing in this region, given the high dependence on fossil fuels in the region, and the ambition of many Asian countries to reach net zero. Transition finance, as a concept, does not have a definition that is agreed across countries and stakeholder groups. Today, different jurisdictions and market actors are applying their own approaches to defining transition investments. Those frameworks and definitions are not all equally stringent nor detailed, which increases the risk of greenwashing, prevents comparability, and reduces investor confidence in this market segment. At the same time, most existing transition finance definitions and approaches do address the specific need and challenge to decarbonize high-emitting industry, where low-emission alternatives are not always fully feasible. This lack of alternatives underscores the crucial role played by transition finance for sectors and regions that may be left behind by some of the existing green and sustainable finance approaches. At the same time, focusing on high-emitting sectors with few feasible low-carbon alternatives significantly increases greenwashing risks within transition finance. This is why the need to drive firm-level action to decarbonize emission-intensive sectors has been a key focus of our work. Last year, we published the OECD guidance on transition finance, setting out 10 critical elements for credible corporate climate transition plans. This guidance has gone on to inform key international initiatives on transition finance and transition planning, including at G20 and G7 level, and I encourage you to take a closer look at the report. One of the key issues the guidance highlights is the risk of carbon locking in transition finance. Carbon locking can arise when transition finance goes to assets or technologies that present a marginal improvement in performance in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but are overall still emission intensive and long-lived. This can be the case, for example, when transition finance is used to make marginal improvements in emission-intensive assets, like natural gas infrastructure. Even if those improvements may somewhat reduce emissions, the overall footprint of the asset can still be high and the asset long-lived. This can both lead to locking and significantly delay the transformation or replacement of high-emitting assets with low-carbon solutions later down the line. In order to maximize the full potential of transition finance, we need to ensure that it does not create carbon locking, both to ensure positive environmental impact and to reduce reluctance among financiers, investors, and corporates to engage in financing the decarbonization of high GHG activities and sectors. Existing transition finance approaches emphasize the need to avoid carbon locking, but largely do not set clear guidance or criteria on how to do so. This is why, just last month, the OECD released the report Mechanisms to Prevent Carbon Locking in Transition Finance. This report showcases good practices to support policymakers develop comprehensive and credible transition finance policies, including standards for financial instruments. The recommendations draw on a range of policy areas that grapple with carbon locking risks. I will highlight just a few of the key recommendations to give you a flavor of the analysis. First, to reduce carbon locking, it is essential to have a long-term perspective when assessing the feasibility of various technology options for investment, and to ensure that benefits and costs are projected over the lifetime of the asset. In this way, potential transition risks, eventual cost of reinvestment to reduce emissions further, and other environmental externalities can be accounted for. Considering all these future costs upfront can better inform transition investment decisions and reduce carbon locking down the line. Second, the development of national sectoral TSG emission reduction pathways is a critical enabler. Companies and financial institutions need clarity on the direction of travel in terms of emission reductions in their sector so that they can make informed decisions about the technology options they should be considering in their transition planning. At the same time, they need to be putting these decisions in perspective with global level carbon budgets and decarbonization pathways compatible with the 1.5 degree goal. Third, improved standards from transition and financial instruments like sustainability-linked bonds are still needed. This market has been growing fast and is beginning to raise greenwashing concerns. Standards and oversight can help strengthen the credibility of these instruments and address emerging loopholes that are today increasing carbon locking risk. And lastly, we need clear standards and frameworks on corporate transition plans to anchor transition investments in the company's long-term planning. Importantly, credible frameworks will require plans to have a net zero target that is based on the Paris temperature goal. This is really crucial to guide investment decision-making in a way that reduces locking companies into long-lived and emission-intensive assets. I'd like to conclude on this last topic of net zero target setting, as it has become an increasing area of interest for the private sector, including for financial institutions. While the number of financial sector firms that have made net zero commitments is commendable, we should not shy away from closely scrutinizing those commitments. As it stands, global climate change mitigation scenarios used by the financial sector to inform net zero targets, transition planning and alignment assessments are not fit for purpose. Recent OECD analysis found that only very few of the scenarios that providers currently qualify as net zero, 1.5 degree or below 2 degrees, can be considered as consistent really with the Paris Agreement. The analysis also found that such scenarios typically lack the geographical and sectoral granularity needed by the financial sector. This OECD study puts forward recommendations for scenario providers, for financial stakeholders and policymakers on improving the design and use of climate change mitigation scenarios by the financial sector. I encourage you to take a look at this report too, as it provides an important basis for the broader OECD body of work on climate-aligned finance and transition finance. Going forward, we will continue working on transition finance and on methods, metrics, and data to assess the climate alignment of finance, notably in relation to the financial sector's net zero commitments. We are engaging with a wide range of stakeholders to do so, including the Asia Transition Finance Study Group, prominent voluntary frameworks such as Defense and IFRS, as well as the Net Zero Data Public Utility launched by Michael Bloomberg and Emmanuel Macron. I very much look forward to further engaging with all of you and look forward to hearing your views on the next priorities and policy measures to ensure that transition finance can reach the regions and companies that need it the most. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.